Where you gonna put the money? I know that's right. Yeah. All right then. Cool. So our first guest tonight is none other than my sister, my friend, my auntie, and sometimes even my mother for some issues that I need. Miss Lanada Williams. She is a mental health specialist. Alliance Family Solutions. She's going to talk to us about her job, and she's going to talk to us about trauma and what trauma does to a person's psyche. Let's give her a hand, everyone. Come on. Miss Williams, man, I'm so happy to see you. When's the last time we talked? We always talk about the real stuff, you know?
I think the last time we met, Sam, we were on American University's campus, and we were having these powerful conversations around the idea of consent and the culture of rape, and how having conversations with men and women and boys and girls, and really embracing the idea of consent being continuous. I got that from Ms. Jones. So DC Rape Crisis Center, there's a lot of great work around that. And the Alliance Family Solutions is a place where families come to do a process that's very natural, and that's healing. If you took water and put it on any type of wound, it would naturally heal itself if you gave it the air and the space. So counseling is, we deserve it as people. And since we're keeping it real and we're talking about people of color, I think that the psychological trauma that we have experienced when we talk about reparations, when we talk about the history of being an enslaved culture, we get into the weeds of how historically we feel unworthy. And it perpetuates itself today because we don't take care of ourselves and we don't seek counseling.
So how do you go about telling people that that is the case? Because just as I said before, we're only looking at surface level things. You know, a kid acts up in school, somebody commits a crime. People, they just want to put the cuffs on them and take them away without understanding why it is that they did it. And even understanding it takes too much time. How do you go about breaking that down to them, you know, at least efficiently and like in a way that they understand?
Well, the thing is, Sam, that we're talking about awareness, and we're talking about cultural manifestations of historical trauma. And that can be very overwhelming to a group of people, because when we talk about defining historical trauma, we're talking about specific things that emotionally and psychologically happen to a group of people. So when we experience the transatlantic slave trade, and we experience that rites of passage, and we talk about how over 400 years and the trajectory of our experience, and now the manifestation culturally of losing your language, losing your landmass, losing your heritage, losing how you wore your hair, how we courted each other, all those pieces, our family, how we're connected to our children, even the way we parent our children. And we talk about, we want to get into the weeds of them, we talk about how spanking happens historically. That's a transgenerational manifestation of trauma, you all, because we were put in our place by someone beating us, and we saw that. So that vicarious trauma of experiencing, hey, when something bad happens, I need to put someone back in their place by spanking them. As Black women, we were instrumental in producing the manpower for the labor for slavery, correct? Because if we weren't having these children, people wouldn't be walking around. And so we were direct products of how that happened. And then as we had our babies, we couldn't love them, right? Because psychologically, we knew that at some point, as a self-protective mechanism, that fight or flight kicks in, and we can't love them because we know at any day they can be taken away from us. So that manifestation of how we take our children away from us, how we don't love them, and how we spank them, we hit them. We're hitting on our babies. We're hitting on our people that we're supposed to love and culturate, and you spank and beat away that little self-esteem in them, that self-efficacy, that they're telling themselves that I am this person. So I know that's a lot, and you don't think that you're going to get that when you seek therapy. But if you don't have a therapist that's talking like this, you're sitting in the wrong couch. You're laying on the wrong couch, because we have to be able to understand the cultural lens of how our psychological trauma happens to us.
So therapy doesn't come cheap, and forget even coming cheap. Some of us don't even want to take therapy sometimes. You know, In your experience, how have you been able to break through those institutional barriers and get the care to the black and brown boys and girls, and even men and women who deal with that trauma?
So what we do is we do it in two ways, Sam, and that's a great question, because we always talk about putting our money where our mouth is, and we talk about things that we value and things that we can afford and things that we invest in. So we invest in shoes, we invest in our clothes, we invest in our house, our homes. But the thing that we can't replace is our mind. The thing that we can't replace is our body, and how we connect the mind-body connection. So we have to start talking about where we put our money. And putting your money where your mouth is literally a saying, so it says that you value what you do. So with an alliance, we have people that come in on a sliding scale. We have people that we see for free. We have people that we educate through our radio show, where we talk about mental health weekly. So we're giving you access, and we're telling people that when you talk about manifesting your own destiny and talking about waiting for, I was waiting for people of color to understand that they're worthy of counseling services, that they're worthy of this healing, and they're worthy of talking about what's on their mind, and it's not a waste of time. So we started this show. So whether or not you tune in, you listen to Lanada Williams show every Tuesday at 6 o'clock, we are talking about mental health issues that manifest with our kids in schools, ADHD. If you don't know what bipolar is, we're talking about that. If you don't know what post-traumatic stress is, we're talking about that.
But even that sometimes, because, you know, as you already know, I've done some mental health reporting of my own. You know, sometimes the system, the DSMs and all of that, the definitions and even the confines of what bipolar disorder is, or even what ADHD is, you know, they're not concrete. They can be very fluid, and there's potential for misdiagnosis. How do we bypass that? Or, you know, how do you as a practitioner look beyond that and try to help kids in cases where they might have symptoms of this disorder and symptoms of that disorder?
Well, what we do is we not only look at, a lot of times kids come with labels. So one thing that we do is we meet with the child before we look at his or her record, so that we get to get that relational piece. People that are culturally based have the rhythm. Like, we all have this natural way that we move throughout life, and it can be very relational. So we meet with the family in their homes. So it's community based. We'll come to your home, or you can come to our office, because organically people feel comfortable where they live. The second thing is, Sam, that understanding what kids eat. So understanding what they're putting in their body and how they're moving throughout life. So if we have kids that have ADHD and every day they're eating takeout, or every day they're eating from the corner store, or they're eating chips, or you're rewarding them with food, we look at all of that in a very holistic way, and we do geneograms, where we talk about your family, talk about your family history, and really get to what you're putting in your mouth and how that goes all the way through your body. So we talk about healthy foods. We talk about how you can go to the farmer's market and buy apples, and we do different play therapy, where we're exposing young children to different types of fruits and vegetables.
Wow, that's wonderful. Let's give Ms. Lanada a hand. That's wonderful, man. And you know, one thing that stuck out to me in hearing you talk, and I've heard you talk numerous times before, and every time I must say, like, you know, just the geek in me just like gets, you know, just gets elated, because so much lingo, so much to learn. But I heard nothing about medication in there. Nothing about medication. And why is that? They tell us, you know, hey, take Ritalin. What's the other one? Adderall. Yeah. All of that stuff. These names that they make up, and they make this stuff in labs, and you know, and then they prescribe it to your children and to your grandfathers and your fathers. Why do you steer away from that stuff, even though they tell you that it works for the child?
Well, I'll say honestly, there's two paradigms of thought, and the idea, and this is we are getting deep, right? So we can talk about this. So the root of medicines are to heal your body organically. So the derivatives of any type of medicine comes from a plant, correct? right? So when you talk about, and we have to get back to that. We have to get back to the point where we do have value in having a small garden, even if it's on the balcony, and understanding like how medicinally all types of medicine comes from plant bases. And also we have to take a very postmodern approach to understanding that sometimes I've seen kids that have had maybe 1 or 2 medications, and how you monitor that has to be something that you're talking to the mom, the dad, you're getting into it, because sometimes our kids aren't able to function without it. It can act like an aspirin. You don't want to have kids that are over medicated, but there's some kids that physically have told me, I couldn't stop my hand from hitting my friend. I can't make friends if I keep hitting them. And taking maybe 1 or 2 pills with a diet change and monitoring that closely with a practitioner understands now I can have friends. Now I don't hit my friends when my stomach is hurting and I feel anxious and I need to hit something, or I go and I'll jump in the corner. So there's 2 different paradigms, but the thing is you have to talk to the psychiatrist. You have to be an active partner in whatever type of medication your child is taking, because if your child has a toothache, you would let them have an aspirin. So I try to normalize it too. So you don't want your child on too much medication, but you do want to monitor it.
Understandable, and that's along the same line of thinking that some practitioners are turning to right now. As you know, and as some members of the audience know, there's this new style of medicine coming out, complementary medicine, where you're merging conventional medicine with homeopathy and other forms of quote-unquote alternative medicine, also known as going back natural in your medication. So for those who need a little context, I'm more than happy to provide it. As you said before, natural medicine has been around for long before conventional medicine, but it's sort of being shunned right now. How do you go about, I guess, talking to a mother or a father who's under so much pressure, who knows nothing about this stuff? How do you advise them against over-medicating their children? Because we said it before, this rabbit hole goes very deep. Painting the big picture for someone may be very hard when all they have in front of them is bills, unbroken homes, and like the immediate needs of the day. So in your experiences, how have you been able to advise, or better yet, have you found any hurdles in advising parents against over-medicating their children?
Well, I think that what you're asking is crucial, because really we're talking about how parents are able to really advocate for their kids. And I think that when we talk about whether or not kids are going to take medication or if they're going to do a dietary change, it has to be something that we start very small. So the key is that you're not going to trust me with a big problem if you don't trust me with the little ones, right? So you want to be seen as someone that's helpful to the family. And I think that family counseling is where we all come together and we talk about giving the family tools so they can move throughout life in a way that's less stressful. So if it's the bills that are the primary thing, it's the thing that's stressing you the most, we're going to talk about the bills first, because it's really hard if I come in as a therapist and I'm like, well, psychologically, how are you feeling today? Mentally, where are you going? And the mom was like, look, I did an 8-hour work shift. I don't have food. I have a kid that's writing on the wall over here. She can't tell me why she's writing on the wall. I have 2 other kids I need to put into the tub. Let's get those babies in the tub. Let's find out what's going on. Let's bring dinner to that counseling session, because you have to get in with our people where they are. And when I say our people, I mean culturally, people of color. It can be a Hispanic family. It can be an African American family. We have to get into and start at that base level so that people know that we're real and we're authentic. You have to feel that authentic piece before you can tell people your deepest, darkest secrets.
And the thing is that even with medicine in general, you mentioned trust and you mentioned just being able to get people to where they are. Historically, medicine and us, well, modern medicine, at least in us, haven't really mixed at all. I wanted to segue quite a little bit to just the holistic care you talked about earlier. You were very good about meeting parents where they are and just helping them organize their day better so they can have better mental health, pretty much. But my question to you is, what next for parents and for children once they know once they understand that they have mental illness and it's something to them now that, beyond just, it's something that's real to them now. It's no longer a myth. How do you help them understand that, coping with that?
I think that the next step, once you understand that your child has a mental health illness, you can understand that that is it can be very temporary. We can talk about this in a way that's very healthy. I think the second thing that you have to do is be very protective, because sometimes when we talk about ADHD, we start throwing out these different terms. You are not the ADHD. You have it, you are experiencing it, but it's not of you.
Right.
So you have to be very clear with the language and the terminology and be very protective of it. So it doesn't have to be that you tell every family member, or it doesn't have to be that you tell every school administrator, because our kids come in with a lot of labels. As a practitioner, I'm always very conscious of being very hyper aware that whatever label I give to a little black boy is going to perpetually change the trajectory of his life as he manifests his way through school. So I'm always very hypersensitive as I don't just give anyone the label of psychosis. I don't just give anyone that label. So we have to be very cognitive of when you're seeking mental health professionals. They have to parent with they have to partner with the parent, and you have to understand the language. If you don't, always consult someone else, ask another question, but that's the key. You want someone that doesn't label you or judge you for not understanding all the lingo.
What kind of questions can parents ask? If you wouldn't mind, just, I know you're the practitioner, of course, but if you can just be a parent for just a second, what kind of questions would you ask yourself if you brought your child into a session?
Well, I am a parent. I'm Justice Michael's mother first, and that's my pride. And with being Justice's mother, I always would ask the questions: what are your credentials? What school, what's your background? Do you have a specialty within the field that I'm sending my child to you for? And if it's not there, when's the last time you've been to a professional development? When's the last time you've honed that skill? Because sometimes we get licensed and people just leave it at the door. That's it. But learning is on a continuum. So I'm expecting that the clinician that I take my child to has that background and respects me, can see Lanada, the person, and can see Justice and see some goodness in him. I'm always very leery when people don't see the goodness in children, because all children want to be good. If your child is not acting in that good, it's because something potentially is happening within their body that they can't. So that's when you want to question. Everyone altruistically wants to be a good person. So if your child is acting out or you're seeing something, you want to question those things. So you want a clinician that sees your child as good, has the credentials and backgrounds, and continuously is learning.
Wow, that is powerful. Let's give Ms. Lanada another hand, everyone. It's not over just yet. We have a couple more questions, and I actually want to segue into the last portion of this interview. I want to talk about trauma. Let's talk about trauma, because that's something that we touched on earlier. We didn't touch on it quite enough. And if you can, define trauma for me, please.
So trauma is a specific incident that's either occurred within your life that emotionally and physically affects you. Trauma can happen to you individually, and it can happen to you in a community. So when we talk about a group of people, we're talking about historical trauma. That's what happened within the Holocaust. It's what happened within the transatlantic trades, what happened to Native American people. When we talk about individual trauma, we're talking about something that specifically happened to you. And it could be because of a natural disaster. It could be that you are living in Katrina and you were there and you experienced this natural thing where you didn't want to leave your home, and everyone was questioning, like, why can't I leave? Why didn't people leave? Why didn't people leave? Well, if you were living in the Southeast 30 years and someone told you needed to come move because it was going to rain, you're like, I'm going to stay here, because psychologically, the idea of home is not just about the building, it's about your sense of safety. If someone told you danger was coming, why would you leave the place you feel safe? So that's why people stayed. That's why people psychologically were like, nah, I'm going down with this shit. Like, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait this out. I've seen this before. So psychologically, it can be a natural disaster, or it could be something that you've experienced. So we talk about sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence. So you can see something, and vicariously, there's a thing called vicarious trauma, where it's not happening to you, but we've seen happen with our black men on TV, and with all the police brutality and those cultural manifestations of the historical trauma that's happened to us, where they don't trust the police. So now they're going into a self-protective mode. When they go into a self-protective mode, they're getting shot and killed. That is vicarious trauma, because we're seeing that on TV. So if you're a black man, you're like, whoa, I gotta live a little differently. I gotta walk a little differently. That is vicarious trauma. That's affecting you psychologically. You're changing the way you're going to move throughout life.
Wow, that is powerful, and she broke it down for us so deeply. Let's move on to the next question, and we're just keeping on trauma. Oftentimes, there's a trauma Olympics, anywhere. People try to say, well, my trauma...
I like that term, trauma Olympics.
Trauma, yeah, please take it. Please, because every time, every argument that I don't argue, I debate. Every debate I've been in, people always try to talk about, well, the Jews, this happened to them, and, the Irish were slaves at one point, they had a potato famine, and, and whites were poor too in the South, and they got along with the poor blacks. They always try to talk about that. And my question to you is, please answer this for me, and answer this for the detractors, please, if you may. Does the size of the trauma what matters more, the size of the trauma or the mental state of the person undergoing that trauma? There's often a big debate about that.
Sam, that's a very deep question. And if it was, it's not about to me, and this is me answering it honestly, it's not about the size of it. It's about that validation. Like, so if it's the size versus what happens, if your child tells you that a trauma occurred, you don't ask them, well, how long did it happen? How big was it? You don't try to put a proportion to that. It happened, and that's it. Right. You're in action mode. So the thing is, it's really about that validation. When you were talking earlier, Sam, you said that reporters tell you, who, what, when, where. The key to it is the why. The why, like in that portion of it, and that validation that someone recognizing your trauma. So when we do trauma work, the clearing and the healing of it is the validation. It's writing down the trauma. It's re-narrating the story. So someone says, and you do that with a partner, you do it with your parent, you do it with whoever is going to be a healing source in that room that will say, you know what? I acknowledge that this happened to you. It doesn't have to be the perpetrator. It needs to be one person that's a loving source that says, I recognize this happened to you. So traditionally, to me, it's not about the size of it. It's not about who happened. Genocide happened to, the Native American people with colonization. It happened to us over as the transatlantic slave trade. It happened to Native American people. It doesn't matter what happened. The thing is, why weren't we given the validation around what happened? So when you talk about validation, you talk about reparations, it's bigger. In my personal opinion, I don't care what people do with the money. It's yours. I don't care what happens. The validation and the recognition on a national level that's happened to every other society historically. You can go Google it. Everyone else has gotten reparations except us. So it's a validation for that. The reason why my research interest is in historical trauma is because the lack of validation and research around what happened. We have to say it happened. People have to come to amends and validate us, because that wound culturally manifests itself out on the streets in South Carolina in everything that we see. The issue about the flag. That was the first Confederate state to sign the Articles of Confederation. It was the first state to secede from the Union. When you look historically at South Carolina, we should not be surprised that we're fighting to get them to take that flag down, right? But that's a different subject. I'm here to talk about psychological stuff.
They're all the same subject, because I couldn't imagine walking down to South Carolina and seeing all that stuff around me when I wake up, when I go eat, when I go walk my dog. I can't imagine seeing that stuff and being in the right mind. So why should they expect other black people to be in the right mind when they see that? Before we close out, I want to ask you one last question, and keep in mind that we are a solution-oriented news organization. We don't Facebook rap, we don't Twitter rap, we do none of that. We talk about the issues and we go to the solutions. So as people who are of a certain consciousness, you are of a certain health consciousness, you understand things that others might not. Seeing that it is kind of unlikely that we will get our validation for our hundreds of years of trauma, what do we as Black people do to start the self-healing? Where would you start?
You know, I would start somewhere very, very simple that is going to sound very cliche to us, but we have to get back to that, and that's libations. We don't talk about it enough, we don't do it enough, but we have to have some type of self-sustaining ritual that heals us. And we used to clown our brothers because people that were engaged used to pour something out for the people who aren't here. You know, all of those cultural traditions and norms that get us back to a healing. And when we talk about libations, we're talking about having a space in your home that you can either show for your family, show for your kids, where you're able to either have a tree or plant or something that's alive, and then you're able to talk about the fact that what has happened to you, whose name do you want to call on? Because when we talk about the histories and names, your name is something that's supposed to remind you of who you are and what you're supposed to be in this life. So being able to call those names, call on that strength when we don't have it, right? We call on people that are stronger than us, and we remember the soldiers that we stand on. Those rituals of libations within your home help to start the healing circle for your trauma, and we never even knew it. So I think that we just have to reconnect to where we were at in that mind-body connection. It could be that you meditate. It could be that you start to practice a yoga. You don't even have to do yoga. You could go out and go for a walk with your babies. Go with something that recalibrates their energy and their connection to the grass. Have them take out their shoes and just walk through the grass so that they recalibrate that energy and get reconnected. So it's small things you can do, but just starting with a ritual that heals yourself.
I love it. Wow. Let's give Miss Lanada Williams another hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for having me here.